Growing up in the Air Cadets and having a pilot for a sister has given me access to a ton of information that pilots are not sharing with their passengers. In today's video, I'll be running through the top 10 most shocking and occasionally frightening things that I have learned. Speaking of frightening, this first fact is actually quite disturbing. Pilots are often far more sleep deprived than we would expect. You might remember the news headline back in 2008 when both the pilot and the co-pilot fell asleep, then missed their landing in Hawaii. The FAA has since imposed pilot rest rules that limit the overall on-duty time and flight hours per day, as well as initiated a process by which pilots can report fatigue without any consequences. But even with these rules in place, pilots are often working long hours and flying through multiple time zones. If you have ever experienced jet lag, you know that even when you have sufficient time to sleep, getting quality sleep can still be a challenge. It's no different for pilots, who are often using sleeping pills and caffeine to function, since their bodies never really have enough time to adjust to the new time zone before their next flight. Not only is it a little bit concerning that pilots are in need of extra sleep, but it's also quite interesting to know that the very first flight that a pilot takes on a commercial aircraft after their simulation training is with us passengers. This isn't too alarming though, because pilots do need to go through many hours of training and ground school, and keep in mind that the new pilot is not alone and is always going to have a co-pilot to lean on for support. But don't read into the term co-pilot too much. Switching airlines leads to a loss in seniority for pilots, so the pilot that is the captain might have far less experience than the first officer that is assisting them. But regardless of who has more experience, or who has the more senior title, both pilots are flying the plane. They will swap positions throughout the flight, so one pilot is flying the plane while the other pilot is doing things like working the radio and watching the radar. But to let you in on a secret, oftentimes neither pilot is flying the plane. You may know that planes are set to autopilot at least some of the time, but you might be surprised to learn just how much of the time autopilot is used during a typical flight. In fact, up to 90% of the flight might be flown on autopilot, since it's often turned on shortly after takeoff and remains on until just before landing. Even when the plane is on autopilot and the sky is clear, pilots are going to keep their seatbelts on for the entire duration of the flight. This is due to the risk of a scary air system that you are not able to detect or predict on the radar as you can with regular turbulence. Pilots keep their seatbelts on even in good weather because of something called clear air turbulence, or more commonly known as air pockets. These air pockets can't be detected on the weather radar and are much more dangerous than turbulence, since they cause strong updrafts and downdrafts that could throw a passenger or pilot out of their seat. Let us know down in the comments if you keep your seatbelt on while flying, even when the seatbelt sign is turned off. I certainly do, with the exception of bathroom breaks and stretching. The good news is that these air pockets are pretty rare, and it's much more common to experience regular turbulence, which the pilots are certainly not concerned with, since they know planes can take way more than you would expect without any damage to the aircraft. Pilots can also usually forecast where there is rough air that's going to cause turbulence and then steer clear of it. But to be honest, avoiding turbulence is more for passenger convenience and comfort rather than safety. As passengers, it is still nice to know when you're sitting in the cabin that if the seatbelt sign has been turned on, you can probably expect some impending light turbulence. But if you hear the pilot asking the flight attendants to take their seat, maybe prepare yourself for a bit of a bumpy ride. There's probably no danger, but it can be quite scary. Something else that can be a little freaky are the secret codes that pilots are announcing over the speakers for the cabin crew. 4-digit squawk codes are used to alert flight crew of emergency situations. 7700 means there's a general emergency. 7600 means there's an issue communicating with air traffic control, and the worst of all would be 7500, which means the plane has been hijacked or that a hijacking is imminent. Air travel is still the safest form of transportation, and the chances of ever having an emergency situation is extremely rare. What you can expect to hear over the speakers would be the pilot announcing takeoff as well as telling you the expected landing time. Or should I say, lying to you about the expected landing time. Since flight time can be influenced by many factors, pilots will often adjust their projected flight arrival to avoid late landings. Adding a few extra minutes to the flight schedule keeps the pilots and the airline's record of on-time arrivals looking its best. This explains the phenomenon that most frequent flyers have experienced, where they end up with a long delay before takeoff, only to arrive at their final destination on time or sometimes even earlier than expected. Frequent flyers will also know that flight prices have skyrocketed. One of the main reasons that flights are so expensive also relates to pilots, or the fact that we don't have enough of them. This leads to fewer flights overall, which makes each of those flights more expensive. There are several factors that are contributing to the pilot shortage, including the high cost of training and the demanding work schedules that pilots often have. Additionally, the starting salary for a commercial pilot in the United States can be as low as $50,000 per year, which may not be that attractive for someone considering a career in aviation. If you are still watching at this point, then definitely consider subscribing so you can tune in for more travel information, tips, and hacks. You'll definitely want to stay tuned for next week's video where I dive into flight attendant secrets. See you then, and safe travels. Bye.